channeling energy at a certain rate and with a certain focus would be power. The definition of power, the rate at which you deliver the energy. The second, I think, takeaway from the history of science is that science, the history of science is punctuated by paradigm shifts. There was a time when people thought that the universe revolved around the Earth. The Copernican revolution was this idea that maybe it didn't. The paradigm shifts take place when you develop a new instrument. So it was optics, it was the telescope that caused human beings to realize that the universe did not revolve around the Earth. Once they had the telescope and they could see the moons of Jupiter, they started to realize that you couldn't really explain the movement of certain moons and certain bodies in the solar system based upon the old theory, right? The Ptolemaic theory of the world. And they had to adopt a new theory. Maybe things revolved around something other than the Earth, perhaps the sun. There's a similar breakthrough in medicine, not via the telescope, but via the microscope, where we thought that disease was caused by spirits and demons and all sorts of other random things, and there was a lot of superstition there. But then when we looked at blood and we looked at fluids, we realized there were actually living creatures in those fluids, and we developed the entire medical science of immunology and germ theory, and we started making breakthroughs because we could see. Then there's a pushback. The pushback against the idea that the Earth might revolve around the sun came from the forces of authority, the establishment. Partly it was the church, but partly it was the monarchy and just government in general. The system had been constructed based on a system of authority where you got your truth from a very powerful central organization, and that truth had adopted a certain set of theories, and this challenged the theories and therefore challenged central power, and there was naturally going to be a friction. So much so that you might very well get jailed, deplatformed, or burned, or bankrupted if you push the new paradigm, and Galileo is maybe one of the more famous examples of that. There's Dr. Harvey in the history of medicine. He put forth the proposition that the heart pumped blood through the arteries and recycled it back to the veins. And of course, for thousands and thousands of years, no one thought that. They didn't actually think the heart pumped blood. They didn't understand circulation at all. And Harvey discovered this, and it was a pretty big breakthrough, but it was so profoundly revolutionary that no one would accept it. The entire medical establishment rejected it. And Harvey's very famous for a quote. He said, "No doctor over the age of 40 will ever believe me." Right? And it leads us to one of the funnier statements in the history of science. Science advances one death at a time, which is maybe articulated by Thomas Kuhn as paradigm shifts take place when the old generation or the old guard dies. You have to wait for an entire generation of power and authority, whether it's in science or whether it's in politics or whether it's in the religious establishment. You have to wait for them to just pass. Or that dogma passes in the event of a war. You're adamantly in favor of fighting wars with horses, and then someone comes along with tanks and machine guns, and you realize your horses don't work anymore, then you discard that. I think Billy Mitchell was court-martialed because he suggested that air power would dominate future wars in the 20s or the 30s. And the military establishment didn't like that, so they court-martialed him. And then, of course, by World War II, we found that perhaps air power did matter in wars. And so people change their views towards science when there's a mortality event. If your country is coming to an end or your life is coming to an end, you're going to be open-minded. Otherwise, if it's not a matter of life or death, people typically cling to the old paradigm until they pass, and you just have to wait for a new generation that has a new set of circumstances to embrace new ideas. I think that that's what I took away from the history of science, and that has helped me a lot in my life as an entrepreneur, and when I eventually discovered Bitcoin, it helped me to understand both why it was so profoundly powerful, but also why it was profoundly difficult for just us to understand.
The last time we met, I remember we had a very interesting conversation about astrophysics, delving into concepts like entropy. But let's consider the importance of applying physics to everyday life. Let's, for example, think about the essential role of electromagnetism and the role that it has on like our daily routines. 50% of the world's GDP is based on Faraday's theoretical developments and inventions related to electricity. So once again, why we should encourage the study of these subjects such as science, coding, and physics to shape, the future.
If you want to provide prosperity to 8 billion people in the world, if I was speaking to anybody, anyone starting their life or their education, or a family said, what should we teach our children in order to make them prosperous? I would say, master the protocols of prosperity. So, what are the protocols of prosperity? One of them certainly is math and physics and engineering, right? Those are the science protocols of prosperity. The second would be something like the English language, which is a communication protocol of prosperity. The third would be Bitcoin, an economic protocol of prosperity. Let's come back to the science protocols. Why are they so powerful? Well, because the laws of physics apply without prejudice or bias, everywhere on Earth simultaneously all the time. And so they're not subject to political distortion and ideological distortion. If you know how to start a fire, you know how to start a fire. If your goal is to avoid burning your house down, that's useful. And if your goal is to avoid freezing to death, it's equally useful. And it doesn't matter whether you're a communist, a socialist, a capitalist, a liberal, a conservative, right? Or what race or what religion you are. It's quickly tested, right? For example, in my field, aeronautical engineering, I remember having a picture of an airplane lodged in a tree, and there was a quote underneath, something to the effect of, the laws of our aeronautics are cruel and unforgiving, right? But you don't get to break them. If you build a plane and you don't build it correctly, it crashes and it burns. And there are no irrational aircraft engineers, or at least there aren't irrational ones for very long. You can't get away with something which isn't truthful for very long in the engineering discipline. So I think mastery of physics, mastery of mathematics, they're useful, they're truthful, they're hard, but they're critical to life. If you wish to not starve to death, if you wish to not crash into the ocean, if you wish to not sink your ship, try rowing across the ocean by yourself, and then you'll realize that an internal combustion engine in the ship would be useful, not running out of fuel, knowing how to calculate how much water you need to get across the ocean, and how much water you need to get across the ocean in the center of balance, of the ship. All of those things would be matters of life or death. Having said all that, they're useful protocols, but they're not the only protocol. For example, base 10 math, it illustrates a point, which is it's a mathematical, or it's a scientific protocol which is useful, but there are others. There's base 2 math, there's Roman numerals, there's base 16 math, hexadecimal math. The Babylonians, divided the day into, these 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness, 360 degrees, and a compass. You have different systems of math. And so why do you want to learn one? You want to learn one because all the machines built operate on that one. Take a calculator and it's got 0 through 9 on the keypad. It's a base 10 calculator. If you master the protocol, you can use the calculator, you can use the computer, the programs work, the accounting ledgers work. You not only do you not sound like an idiot, which is useful to get the cooperation of other people, but you can actually type a problem into your computer and get an answer that will save your life. So that's why I think we want to teach our children useful scientific protocol. We're gonna need it in order to move, in order to breathe, in order to make the electricity work. And of course, Faraday gave us, in essence, the laws of electromagnetics, and electricity is electromagnetic energy. Not the only form of energy. There's acoustic energy, sound. There's potential energy. There's nuclear energy. There's a lot of forms of energy. John D. Rockefeller gave us, in essence, chemical energy in the form of a barrel of petroleum. But the magic of electromagnetic energy, right, it's clean, it's very efficient. You can put it into your house, put it into your plane, put it into your ship. You can build appliances with it. You can, perhaps wear it on your wrist. You can transmit it through the atmosphere. And of course, everybody, all of modern civilization was profoundly affected by it. People were profoundly fearful of it when that new technology was developed. But every corporation that resisted it became obsolete. And it's just a reminder that when new technology arrives for channeling energy, you have to master it in a responsible fashion. You can't live in fear of it. Even though the word in the English language for an encounter with technology that is painful and unexpected is shocked. So when you touch an electric wire, it shocks you, right? It can electrocute you, may burn your house down, may start a fire. It's a very scary thing. We're shocked. But in fact, as you pointed out, half of the civilization is based upon overcoming this fear and mastering a new technology for good, as opposed to, cowering in fear of the new and resisting it.
So now that we're talking about that, in the 21st century, one of the most prominent concepts has been digital transformation. The companies that have reshaped the world in the last few decades have pursued dematerialization. How can you describe this concept that you use and why it's so important?
The first generation of technology paradigm shift was, I think, the digital transformation of information. Okay, so what did we do? We took an entire library and we dematerialized it and we put it onto an iPad or we put it into a computer. It used to be a wealthy person had a library of 10,000 books. But then Google scanned all the books and Apple sold you an iPad, and now anyone for a few $100s could have a library of millions of books. So we dematerialized all the books in the world. We dematerialized in the sense that if you have 100 billion books, they all collapsed into bits. We got rid of the material, we got rid of the physical energy and the matter. And therefore, when the essence of the book became information, it became non-conservative. And if I want to manufacture more, I have to chop down a bunch of trees and burn a lot of coal and run a lot of factories, and I have to deliver a lot of paper, a lot of books. They're heavy. And anybody that ever carried 100 books up a flight of stairs knows that it's not easy moving books around. I can zap the electrons, and now I can actually give 1 billion people 100 books each. What if I give everybody that ever lived, or everyone that lives, every book ever written? And what does it cost to do that? In the physical world, it's impossible to do practically, and to accomplish 0.1% of what I just described probably sucks up all of the economic energy of the civilization. We've just found a way to give every student in the world every book they're ever going to read for free. This is non-trivial because sometimes people pay $3,000 for college textbooks. So if every student pays $3,000 for college textbooks and some people can't afford to pay $3,000 to get through college, you can see how the physicality of the book is going to be an impediment for the world to be educated. When we digitally transformed the book, we released huge amounts of economic energy. That's almost like a crystallizing reaction. It's like when the steam becomes water, it gives off energy. When the water becomes ice, it gives off more energy. And if you want to reverse the transaction, you heat ice, you get water, heat the water. To get steam, you put energy back in. Well, that energy that falls out of the system, where did it go? It went to Google. It went to Apple, right? The biggest companies in the world, Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon. How did they become worth $1 trillion? Well, they dematerialized the retail storefront, that's Amazon. They dematerialized all books and music. To a certain degree, that was Apple. To a certain degree, that was Google. Facebook dematerialized relationships. Used to be, you took pictures of your family, you put them in a shoebox, right? And you printed a bunch of photos, and you had a bunch of shoeboxes, and you had an album, and you paid for the album, and you put it on a shelf, and you bought the shelf, and you bought the space, and you bought the album, and you bought the chemicals, and you bought the dartboard, and you bought the camera. And all that went away. What you had was the Facebook album, and the money went to Facebook. So digital transformation of information is profound. Maybe there's 10 to 20 million people in the world with a PhD. There's 8 billion people, but there's only 10 million with a PhD. So why is it that only a small fraction of the world gets max education? Well, part of it is cost, right? You could argue some people don't want to have a PhD, but the cost is extreme. It might cost $1 million to give somebody a PhD. Okay, but if I digitally transform it, it costs me electricity. So that first 30 years, we got explosions in digital information, digital entertainment, digital education, digital merchandising. Microsoft is built on the digital transformation of business processes. Pretty soon every company is shuffling all of their files around on Microsoft Rails. If you want to give music to 1 billion people, well, how much did it cost to listen to Beethoven's 7th Symphony in 1850? You paid 100 professional musicians, right? The kings actually had their own royal orchestras, and they hired and retained 100 musicians to be always ready to play for royalty. And I guess you can calculate what it cost. You know, in the Western world, a full orchestra is millions of dollars a year, and divided by listening 20 times, it's extremely expensive. On the other hand, I did delivery rates, a record player, and a phonograph. And then when we finally materialized the phonograph, the record player, and the record itself, we dropped them into a file that runs on an iPhone or an Android phone. Now you could give Beethoven's 7th Symphony to everyone from the world, and that's probably not even a penny. So you want to give music or culture to everybody on earth. That's what created the internet wave. That was very characteristic of the mobile wave. But there's a fundamental distinction between information and energy. And so I would say the first generation, the first 30 years, was the digital transformation of information. And information is not conservative. I can give you my copy of Moby Dick as a book, and I'm transferring something embedded in energy, and if I give you the book, I don't have the book. But if I send you the PDF file of Moby Dick, I still have the file, and you have the file. We both have the book. So I can give all 8 billion people the book in a non-conservative way. There's information. But if there's energy in it, energy content, I have to transfer that energy to. So, the first 30 years of this revolution, we're all about digital transformation of information. which is the digital transformation of energy. And the conservation of energy is one of the most basic laws of physics. And conservation of energy means that potential energy becomes kinetic energy, but then the potential energy is gone. When I'm up here, I dive here, I'm no longer there. And if I could dive here and also be there, the universe would work, right? So I think Bitcoin represents the most profound application of the creation of digital energy and the channeling of digital energy. And it's a paradigm shift because everyone that has engaged in the digital revolution, the digital transformation, anything else, all of their transformation